inexperience, fatigue, and time pressures. All three are obvious causes of error. But our research has highlighted that the problem is more fundamental than this. Error is part and parcel of daily practice. It's at the very heart of what medicine is about. When a patient sees a doctor, diagnosing the problem is the first step to treating it. Mistakes are made regularly at this crucial point, and these errors can be made by the very best doctors. Sir Donald Irvine is the president of the General Medical Council and one of Britain's most senior doctors. For many years, he practiced as a family doctor in the north of England. Once he made an almost fatal misdiagnosis on a patient. It's an incident he has never discussed in public before. In the early hours one morning, a woman phoned the doctor saying her husband was in serious distress and suffering a lot of pain. The man had a history of a duodenal ulcer, and after examining him, the doctor concluded his ulcer had flared up. His diagnosis couldn't have been further from the truth, because the patient was, in fact, suffering from the beginnings of a heart attack.
I saw him and examined him, and I concluded that he had a flare-up of his ulcer and planned to manage it accordingly. I went home, back to bed, and an hour later I had another urgent call from his wife. I went back to the house straight away, and it was quite obvious that he was having a heart attack. I felt very badly about it. I felt just exactly as other doctors do in the circumstance. I've got it wrong, I've made a mistake, this could have had very disastrous consequences for the patient, etc. It was a classical diagnostic trap.
Making an on-the-spot diagnosis is a challenge that faces doctors every day. Surinder Singh is a GP at a busy practice in London. 3 years ago, he misdiagnosed a patient, believing their symptoms to be nothing more serious than flu. 4 days later, his patient was dead.
The case arose a few years ago, and it was with a man I'd known for a while. He's about 60, lived in the locality, and he called me when I was doing surgery one morning. It's around 10 a.m. And he certainly didn't sound very well over the phone, so I arranged to see him at the end of surgery. So towards the end of the morning I visited him, and yes, he wasn't very well. He'd got a high fever, had a nasty sore throat, he'd also got some tummy pain, he'd developed some diarrhoea, and this was fairly acute in onset. I thought that was actually a viral flu-like illness. He wasn't photophobic, that meant he wasn't light sensitive. I advised him on taking lots of paracetamol to keep the fever down, making sure he drinks over the next day or so, and I really expected him to be a lot better within 24 hours.
Unknown to Surinder Singh, he'd made a classic diagnostic error. It was to prove fatal.
The following day, when I wasn't in practice, he suddenly deteriorated. He was found by the relatively early hours of the following morning and taken to hospital, where a diagnosis of pneumococcal meningitis was made. That's the more uncommon form of meningitis. And he died 3 days later. It was certainly quite a shock, and I'm sure I'm not unusual in that most doctors would in fact think back and say, okay, what could I have done differently in order to either identify this earlier or prevent it from happening? And that, I think, would go through the minds of most doctors. I think that's a natural thing to do.
Misdiagnosis often occurs because medicine is not an exact science. Much of it is still intelligent guesswork. But that's not something patients want to hear. A common public illusion is that doctors are like car mechanics.
I take my car to the garage, I say there's something wrong with the brakes. He looks at it, he takes a history, he says, when does the brakes have a problem? He then does some tests, he then makes the diagnosis. I've checked the pedals, and I've checked the hydraulics, and I've checked the disc drives, and I've diagnosed the fact that it's the disc drives, and I'm fixing the disc drive. And if he doesn't mend the car so it's safe to drive, he's negligent. And there's this picture that you go to the doctor, he knows what's wrong, he knows how to fix it, and if he doesn't know how to fix it and he doesn't know what's wrong, then let's find another doctor who does.
The public still has this touching belief that if I only do yet another X-ray, another MRI scan or whatever it is, that I will be able to diagnose exactly what is wrong with them. But the reality is that for so much chronic disease, for example, there is no exact diagnosis. I deal with patients with chronic back pain, and so many patients ask me, what is the diagnosis here? And I say, I really don't know beyond you've got back pain, but it's no good doing an MRI scan because that's not going to show it.
If diagnosis is the first daily challenge in the practice of medicine, the next is treatment. Even when doctors know what the problem is, they don't always know how to fix it. The potential for error is considerable.
All doctors, in some ways, are bogus doctors, because doctors are very, very aware of the extreme limitations of what we can do. You know, we can often do something about pain. We cannot defeat death. Much of sickness can't be countered. Many of the big diseases, cancer, Alzheimer's, we have very limited ways of dealing with those diseases. So all doctors know that vulnerability, that limited ability, and patients often aren't aware of that. They have much greater expectations of what medicine can achieve than it actually can achieve.
One of the classic areas for mistakes is obstetrics, which deals with pregnancy and childbirth.
There's a wonderful series in Smith's at the moment that talks about medicine. It talks about something like a miscarriage. You have a miscarriage, you then have to have the womb emptied. In point of fact, it's desperately difficult, because if somebody's just had a pregnancy, the womb is very soft, and you've got a choice, or you've got a bias, either to being very thorough and making quite sure that you've emptied the uterus, but in which case you've got a much greater chance of making a hole in the uterus, or being too gentle, in which case you might well have the lady come back and complain that you haven't taken all the tissue. And there's no way out of this. You're either too gentle on most occasions or too rough. And there's nothing to tell you in any particular case which one you've been.
And during treatment, the most commonly reported errors occur in medication. Reported mistakes with drugs are estimated to account for nearly 20% of all errors. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Nobody knows just how many drug mix-ups there really are.
In a moment's complete mental blank, which I still shake my head in disbelief that I had, I just pushed in the rest of the diamorphine straight in.
Although there have been many advances in all fields of medicine, medication in particular has seen a revolution in the last 50 years. Then there would have been only 100 types of different drugs available. Now there are several thousand. It means the chances of mixing them up or giving the wrong dose are hugely increased.
What we're going to do then is I'm going to give you a little injection in your arm, pop you off to sleep, and then we'll do the operation. The next thing you know, you'll be waking up afterwards in the recovery ward. Okay?
Anaesthetists like William Notcutt administer dangerous drugs every day. Incorrectly given, they could be deadly, and Dr. Notcutt has had many near misses. These have had such a marked effect on him that he felt it important enough to talk openly to us about his own mistakes.